Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got a fantastic guest for you today coming out of Boston, Naeemah Elias. She is Harvard educated and trained. She's got a fantastic story growing up in poverty, going on to doing the great work that she's been doing. She's going to be talking to us about thriving as an outsider, developing your own voice, sharing with people, and I'm really happy to have her on. So, Naeemah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to see you.
Yeah, talk about your story, and I love your riches to your story of riches. So talk about that, and we'll dive right into the conversation and add value to the audience.
Absolutely. So I grew up in poverty on the south side of Chicago, and my parents really focused on education as the path forward, right? How to change your life and have a different life experience. And we moved around a lot as kids. And so I think I learned how to jump from one thing to the next, right? Like you start into a new space and you just have to figure out really quickly, how do you make it work and how do you make your mark and then move on to the next thing. Grew up there, was able to get into Harvard, and that was a very difficult and interesting experience. And I took some time off of Harvard and worked on Capitol Hill and then went back. After Harvard, I was a professional actress, so definitely a non-conventional path. And then I went into finance, and I spent some years working in finance. And this is where I really started to really understand my outsider experience, right? I think I had been an outsider in a lot of different places, obviously, poor kid at Harvard and all of that. And at State Street, at the bank, I started to really understand as a Black woman trying to climb the corporate ladder in a finance organization, I realized how much I was a party of one a lot, right? I was the only woman in the room a lot of times. I was the only person of color in the room a lot of times. And then I started coaching and training people around me, helping young professionals or even professionals my own age, right, who had been stuck in their spaces and helping them to understand how to use their perspectives and their experience as an outsider to really bring different views to the room and helping them to learn how to navigate the corporate ladder, navigate the corporate space with their outsider identities. And so I left the bank about a year and a half ago. And now I've been running my own practice and really leaning into. Did I lose you? No. Okay. So my computer did something weird. So I started my own practice and really started to lean into this concept of thriving as an outsider and using my communication training, using my understanding of navigating different spaces and helping people to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can personally resonate because like my parents, they came in first generation, and they always told me and my brother, education, that's the way to stand out. It wasn't gonna be, obviously it's not athletics, or obviously I climbing this corporate ladder didn't really fit into which we'll talk about as an outsider. And so I really love this idea. First question I have for you is a lot of people think that outsider is a handicap. It's like either you mentioned gender, race, your religion, nationality, and people think of it as, oh, I'm never going to make it because I am X. But you actually talk about thriving as an outsider. So how do you change that mindset, and especially in like very archaic established settings in the workplace, or even society? As society is changing, but how do you thrive?
So I think there's a couple of things. One, however you identify as an outsider, you're carrying some views and some attitudes that are actually blocking you from being successful, right? And so the example that I give is if you grow up a girl in the world, then it's likely that you learned at a very young age that, like, if you make a boy uncomfortable, he might punch you in the stomach, right? As a little kid. And then as you get a little bit older, if you if a boy invites you out on a date or offers to buy you a drink in a bar and you don't turn him down just the right way, he might ridicule you or publicly shame you, right? And so as a girl growing up, you get all of these indications that it's not a good idea to make boys uncomfortable. And then when you move into corporate spaces and the people in charge are all boys, then you're not challenging, pushing back, leaning in, asking questions because you've been subtly trained your whole life not to make boys uncomfortable. So that's an example of a specific example, right? But in that area, I would say the tools that the insiders use are networking and relationships, right? So as a girl in a bank that is mostly run by boys, I took it upon myself to make friends with mentors and sponsors who were male and who were more senior than I was. And so building relationships with people, and then I would ask questions. If I was offered a salary, I would reach out to one of my mentors and say, is this a good salary? Would you accept this if this was offered to you? If I had an experience that didn't quite feel right, I would reach out to one of my male mentors and say, this is what I'm seeing. Am I overreacting? Or is this a normal situation? And so building those relationships with people who are established means that I have a space where I can go and understand my situations and my experiences through the lens of people who've already had it. And then when the time comes for me to take a step forward, I have lots of people that I can talk to and say, hey, I'm ready for my next adventure. And when something presents itself, they can say, oh, you know what? We got this opportunity to launch this new function in Singapore. And I know Naeemah's been saying that she's dying to do an international assignment. Let's ask Naeemah if she wants to do it instead of let's ask John or let's ask Jake, right? Because now we know who Naeemah is. We know what she's interested in doing. And she hasn't isolated herself into her small community and not talked to anybody. Everybody knows who Naeemah is and what she wants. And so therefore we can provide opportunities for her to have those things.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And like I said, you did a very smart and strategic way is you recognize where you are and then just network. What I really love is the networking and relationships, and very similar. I have a very similar approach. So this next question is, why do you, as an outsider, or I hate to use the term outsider now, when we talk about outsiders, and a lot of people suffer from imposter syndrome, and talk about this correlation with imposter syndrome and how you manage those feelings when you're up for a promotion or you have to speak up in a meeting or give a presentation. Talk more.
Yeah. So imposter syndrome absolutely goes hand in hand with this idea of being an outsider, right? I don't have any foundation for being here. My family didn't work in corporate. And so you're carrying this idea that, oh, somebody's going to realize that I don't belong. And what you're carrying is the I don't belong, not the I'm not capable. And so I think beginning to realize what the actual qualifications are to sit in this space, thinking about the qualifications of the people around you and recognizing in comparison how well you're doing, I think is really important. And taking in the data that says you're doing a great job. When we sit in imposter syndrome, it's really easy for us to say, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not capable. I don't belong here. But you're isolating. And when you sit back and you realize how much the team around you is not doing any better than you are, they're not more capable than you are. And a lot of times the next level of leaders up is not as experienced or as knowledge as you are. And you have been sitting, like if you have imposter syndrome, you probably should have been promoted a while ago, but you didn't ask for it because you didn't feel like you were ready. Other people who felt like they were ready raised their hands and they moved up, but they're not as qualified as you are. So I think one of the questions that someone recommended that I ask at one point when we were talking about imposter syndrome was, if not me, then who? And then when you sit back and you look at all of your peers, there's an opportunity for a promotion, and you look at everyone on your team, do you feel like the other folks on your team are more ready for that promotion than you are? And most of the time, the answer is no, of course not. And so if not me, then who? And then realizing that if you sit as an outsider and if you sit in imposter syndrome, you are less likely to raise your hand for challenges. And if the folks who identify as insiders, or who you identify as insiders, are raising their hand and saying, yeah, I can figure that out. Not, yes, I know how to do that, but yeah, I can figure that out. They are getting opportunities to move forward. They're getting opportunities to play. And you're saying, you're waiting to be able to say, yes, I have done that. I already have all of that experience. I have developed all of those skills. And so therefore I'm ready to step forward. But if you have 100% of the expectations of the job description, you are actually overqualified. Every time you step into a new role, there's supposed to be something for you. You have to be able to learn and to grow and develop an additional skill set. If there's nothing left for you to learn, you're already past that role.
Mm.
And so I think really just sitting back and recognizing that you're not supposed to be perfect in the role before you get into it. You're not supposed to be perfect in the role for a little while, unless you're performing surgery. Now, obviously, you want to know it really well before you step into it. But I think the idea that we're supposed to be perfect in advance, the idea that we're supposed to know everything in advance is a detriment. And it is the idea, it is the concept that holds us back and prevents us from taking the steps forward that our peers are taking. And so they move up and then they move up again and then they move up again. And we're still sitting here trying to figure out if we're ready for that first step. And then when we look at corporate spaces and we think about the funnel, and the funnel is this way, right? At the bottom, the diversity mix is really very comfortable, right? It's very blended. There's folks from different nationalities, different genders, everybody's represented. But there's a select group of folks that we identify as insiders who are like, I want to do that. I want to try. I want to try. I want to try. So they're moving up while we stay put. And then eventually we move. And then eventually some more of us move. But the group of us who are moving is getting smaller and smaller as we move up because so many of us are still sitting in that I'm not perfect yet. I don't know everything just yet.
That's again very insightful. And a follow-up question I have for you is there are some times in industries, professions where it's not in the cards, and it could be skills and abilities, or just could just be biases. Or so how do you, as an outside, as somebody as of the that's different, when do you decide to become an entrepreneur and set up your own shop versus just, it's because it sounds like what you're doing is very strategic, but it's also dependent upon the company and the people and just allowing you those opportunities. So how do you decide when to go out on your own versus just stick with it?
So going out on your own is a huge challenge, right? And I think it's for some folks it kind of comes easily, but you think I'm really good at this thing, and so I want to go do this thing. I always said I'm never going to start a business because I'm not a salesperson. And I know that I would have to do sales and marketing, and that's not my jam. It turns out it was more straightforward for me than I expected it to be. But the thing you have to realize about starting a business is that you're not just going out to do the thing that brings you joy. There's a whole lot of infrastructure. And even if you're a business of one, managing all of the details of the business itself is going to come as a surprise. And so I always recommend when I'm talking to folks who are thinking about entrepreneurship, dabble, play with it a little bit, start building your business while you're with your company and really start doing that work and exploring and building up some clientele. And then once you have a clear sense for what the infrastructure needs to look like and how to run it, and you feel comfortable, jump, right? In the meantime, if you're comfortable staying in a corporate setting and that's where you want to be, I say change companies. In the beginning of my career, I changed companies every 2 years. And then I only stayed with State Street for 13 years because I was able to move around within the organization. I had 7 jobs in 13 years. And so moving and changing allows you to build the skill set for how do I transform? How do I build? How do I create something new? And that's the skill set that you need. And so look for opportunities to build the transformation skill set. So within your company, join an employee resource group and plan some events and help build out some things. Create a new employee resource group that doesn't exist. So you have the experience of creating a company, but in a safe space. Create a program, create a training, create a development, build something in a safe space and get a feel for what that is like for you. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And then when you get ready to step out and start your business, you'll have a sense for what partners you need. What's the part that really is hard for you or that you're not interested in? And who's the right partner to work with so that stuff can be taken care of. And the obvious potential failure point for your company is handled before you even start it.
Yeah, really. I know we're coming almost to the end. We have around 5 minutes remaining. And so I wanted to ask you this question because I've noticed this because the more I'm in entrepreneurship and everybody's talking about you want to be an outsider, you want to stick out, like that's your unique, that's your signature.
Mhm.
Um, and then, in my previous career as a physician in these corporate settings, it's like people change their faces. You describe it as a chameleon, and it's like people say one thing and then to one person and another person, they'll say different. Just and so, is it better to be like an outsider, just stick out like a sore thumb, be different, and if it doesn't fit, just do your own thing, versus be a chameleon? Talk about that.
So when I say chameleon, I think about doing different things, not being different people. But yes, I think when you're working in a corporate setting, you have to know how to play the game. You have to know what's expected to be able to be successful in this space. I have always had my own voice. I've always presented myself as myself. And what that means is that when I step into a new role, when I step into a new team, I get to be me because I interviewed as me, I networked as me, and they hired me as me. If you show up with a different persona for the interview, if you're networking with a different persona, their expectation is that when you show up for the job, you're going to be that person. And that's really hard to maintain. And so when I'm coaching folks about communication and interview processes, I strongly discourage becoming a different person for the interview process. It is necessary to know how to communicate in different environments,
Yeah.
but I think it's different from becoming a different person when you walk in. And it happens all the time. It happens all the time. People put on what they think is necessary to be able to get the job because they really want the job. But then they get there and they realize they don't like the team, they don't like the lead, they don't like the culture. And it's like, yeah, but like the person you presented would have loved that culture.
Yeah.
And so if you don't present yourself, you might accidentally get an amazing job that's only amazing for someone else. And yes, you should be yourself. Yes, you should speak with your own voice. But at the same time, you have to learn how to polish it. You have to learn how to navigate interviews with some comfort. You have to know how to prepare so that when you get into the room, you can tell stories and you can share experiences about yourself that help them to understand who you are. And you do it in a comfortable enough way that they're excited about who you are. And so when we think about like how do you prepare for an interview, how do you get comfortable for that kind of thing? It's more about getting practice with sharing yourself and less about becoming something different. And so, yes, I think people do need to be chameleons, especially entrepreneurs, because you have to walk into different environments and you have to know how to speak their lingo. You have to know how to interact, and every client's going to be different. The cultures are going to be different. The experiences are going to be different. So, you have to be able to play through that. And so, that's important. But that doesn't mean transforming into different personalities.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a, we have, so yeah, how can people find you and follow you and reach out to you and learn more about you?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm on LinkedIn. That's my happy place. That's where I play. So you can find me at Naeemah Elias on LinkedIn. And then there's a link that I'll share where you can reach out to me to do a free consultation if you want to talk about career mobility or communication skills, or if you feel like there's value in bringing me into your company to talk about leadership and to talk about thriving as an outsider. Reach out, schedule a consultation that's free, and we can chat about it.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this and really insightful, impactful comments, and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.